Rhyd, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Rhyd,
there we go. Sorry, there, I already learned something new. I'm also going to ask you about White Wolf, so that should take up 3/4 of the time.
About what? I'm sorry.
White Wolf games in the post.
Oh, right.
But before we do, for people who are actually joining us on the call, this is a webinar format. So Rhyd and I are going to talk, and obviously if you have questions, there is a Q&A box, and we'll get to that, either along the way or halfway through. I'm going to leave it open during, now that I have 3 screens like a day trader. And if you would like to chat in the chat box while we're talking, just make sure you've got your chat set to panelists and attendees, or otherwise it'll just be Rhyd and I who can see it, and we will be busy having our little discussion. So that's it. Are you a little bit quiet, or is it my audio? Say something.
Hi.
Awesome. No, it was my audio, so we're good to go. All right. So I've told that chat and questions, and yeah, honestly, I mean, for people who don't know how this discussion came about, Rhyd wrote...
Hold on 1 second. I need to open some shutters so our cat can
go for it. Oh, I can see you in the reflection doing that. Look at that.
Hey, yeah. I moonlight part-time as a cat doorman.
I see. That seems like a full-time job, but
no, she's good. I'm on call all the time.
Gotcha. Well, anyway, so I guess it was last month now, because it's June. Rhyd wrote a post on his blog called Here Be Monsters, and it really landed at the right time for me. There was some stuff there that I'm like, wow. And when I say landed at the right time and wow, there were some comments that seemed like icebergs. There were some statements and sort of observations in it that I thought, and I expect this to be the case, we're sort of the top of a bigger discussion. So Rhyd and I were going backwards and forwards on email, arranging this and sort of trying to land what I think this chat could be. And we both kind of agreed that it should, because discussions heading in a political direction, in the sense of not having a political discussion, but discussing politics as an entity, can get a bit, especially when we're going to talk about ressentiment, can get a bit ressentimenty. And I think we both kind of landed on the idea of this discussion being outcomes based. So we want to hit a number of topics that are germane on a macro level, but for me, from my perspective, when it comes to outcomes, I would like those discussions to have a transformative implication on an individual basis, so people can kind of come into a new relation with concepts that allows them, it's almost like actionable insight. And I don't want to say that and leave it hanging, because actually one of the things I want to critique is the presumption of action at some stage in it. So that's the backstory to it, and I guess, I mean, do you want to begin by? Was there an inspiration behind the post, or was it just something you've been mulling over, or did something happen when it came to Here Be Monsters that led to that particular piece?
Yeah. Well, so the last few months I've been thinking about. I've been out of the United States now for 5 years or so. Living in Europe, you kind of get a completely different idea of what politics are about. You actually see a real left that does things versus the American left that spends a lot of time arguing with each other about, how oppressive they're all being, but actually never doing it. There hasn't been a general strike in the United States since 1913, I think it is, 1913 or 1916. So, that was part of it. But what specifically broke me into that was a discussion I was having with a friend of mine. He had linked me to a New York Times essay about neopronouns. Neopronouns, which I mentioned in the essay, are not just they, and the older forms of Z's here. I've had friends who've used those, but pronouns that are related to physical objects, ideas, natural objects, mythological objects. For example, people who say the pronouns are fey, phase, self. And I had posted something about it on Facebook, which is, nightmare always. But I was just like, hey, everybody, make sure that you are not oppressing cloud selves. And the reaction to it was startling. I think at the end, before it died down, there were about 450 comments. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people were arguing extremely vehemently that, wait, no, we need to take these seriously. Self-identification is important no matter what. Who am I to question whether or not somebody is a cloud? And of course, my materialist side, my Marxist side, just the side of me that spends a lot of time out in the forest says, no, I actually know what clouds are. I've seen them. I don't know what the pronouns are. My guess is they don't have to, because they're not part of the human order of meaning. So I started on that, and then I I just dug up this bizarre story of the time I went out with a date, or on a date with a bat. Very bizarre. That was all true, by the way. And try to make a linkage between that and show, hey, look, our political ideas are so divorced from the material world now that they're ineffective because they're unrooted. There is no reference to the real anymore. And that's not to say we know what the real is, but there's no reference to it. I'm a cloud. Like, no, actually, you're not. I don't know specifically what you are. I cannot say that you are, human and what that means. Are you male, female, whatever? Those tend to be a little bit unclear. But I know you are not a cloud because I see clouds. That is cloud. Yeah. You are not a cloud.
Yeah, that's an important point, I think, which is you can tell what they're not, but it doesn't mean you're a human in error. It just means you can say with confidence that you're not a cloud. Yeah.
At least in this order of meaning, yeah. If those things in the sky are clouds, but also this person is a cloud, then my definition of what clouds are has to change. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but honestly, no. This makes sense. These are clouds. These are, nuages, like, in whatever language you are. Cloud is not something that we identify ourselves at. And then so from there, I mentioned how, my experience in my early 20s playing role-playing games, live action.
Which ones, by the way? Which White Wolf games? Let's be.
So I was really lucky. I was in Portland, Maine for 3 years, and there was a live action role-playing event every month in a high school. They rented it. It was a weekend event. It started on Friday and it ended on Sunday morning. So we slept there, and it was all of them. It was everything, but it was medieval, which was the best part. So
Vampire the Dark Ages, because that was my favorite.
That's exactly it. It was Dark Ages. I played a Grawl, actually. So okay. I was a werebear. It was great fun. And then, Sunday you left it behind, Of course, you hang out with your friends otherwise, and occasionally they try to kind of push that boundary. Suddenly people were starting to rock, paper, scissors, to decide on something. I'm like, no, that's, we're at a cafe right now. Like, let's leave that. Let's have this boundary around what this is. And thinking about why I eventually gave those up, it was specifically because my own experiences of the supernatural, or I don't like the word supernatural, sure. It's all natural, just, what is outside of the normal human order of meaning. My own experiences with those were too profound for me to play make-believe, or pretend as if these things exist, because they do. So that's what pulled me out of it. But it seems like, to some extent, and I don't think this person will ever talk to me again, but I had gotten into a discussion with someone who was explaining to me how people who use neo-pronouns on Twitter were getting attacked by 4chan and 8chan right-wing fascists who were going through finding all of their proclaimed triggers and sending them videos that would make them go crazy, and make them experience trauma. It's like, if you're a leftist, you need to care about this. And I was like, no, actually, this is just pushed way beyond any sense of reality. One, don't tell everybody what your triggers are.
I don't know where to begin with. Like, absolutely, it's not even not having compassion for people in trauma. It's, here's an idea.
Well, but see that there's a link between most of the role-playing games went online to some degree, with the old bulletin boards, but then later, where you could continue to kind of enact who you are, what your fantasy was of yourself. And in many ways, Twitter and Tumblr especially, in the framework of these social justice identities, as Angela Nagel points out in Kill All Normies, 100 different new gender iterations were created through Tumblr. That's role-playing. That's not, you're not experiencing that through human social interactions. You're experiencing that on this computer where you're pretending, and this is my avatar. And for the most part, if you'll notice, most of the avatars tend to be anime characters, the ideal sense of like who they are. But at no point is there, okay, wait, who are you underneath this? Who are you besides all of these screens? What is your physical reality? But we don't experience it because internet role-playing, and for me, I think being in Europe now for so long, meeting so many different other sorts of people, I've realized, wow, most of our politics in the United States and continuously, especially with the woke politics, is role playing, and there's no grounded in, there's no root in reality there.
Yeah. So what I find interesting about that is we've sort of touched on a few things that I think would be true in wherever our cosmologies overlap, right? So you like people like, this is the trouble. This is the thing, and I talk to Connor about this every time he comes on the show. Leftism in general emerges as essentially a critique of European monarchies undergoing industrialization, which means it is situated in a view of the world that is very often crap, objectively speaking, like philosophically crap. And so you have pseudo versions of realities that I think that I find frustrating. So like we talk about people identifying as clouds, that's not a reality, but shape-shifting is a reality in animist cosmology. So we actually have ways of coming into relation with form and body in the more than human world and so on. And this is to your point about Tumblr and the atomization of like the multiple factor of humans, or the multiple reality of humans and other things, is just trapped in this fake, in this pseudo reality, right? So it's this digitally mediated pseudo reality, and the trouble is trying to tell people that that's not real is a challenge when that contact needs to happen at like the baseline metaphysics that's sort of iterating these things. Do you know what I mean?
If I can for a second, I think the way of putting this is, in all of the animist cultures which I'm aware of, in order to shapeshift into something, you need to have a relationship with it.
Yes.
You don't shapeshift into a raven having imagined what a raven is. No, you have an experience of it. You have to have developed a relationship with the thing, this thing outside of yourself, outside of your imaginal space. You've had a relationship with that, and then you create a connection with that, and then you are able to take on its callings.
Yeah.
What's happening now? No, this is not. There is no connection to these things that when people say, "Oh, I am really this," and otherkin, etc. How many of them have actually met a fox?
No. Yeah, that's what
actual.
I think they don't
And
have an epistemology for it. Yeah.
I'm sorry. To be fair, it's incredibly difficult to have a relationship with a fox, to be in any sort of relationship with them. They do not like to be around humans very long, you know? But to say, I am also a fox, it's like, oh, that's interesting. So what's a fox to you? Because it's not this fox. It's not the fox that runs across the hill behind my house every night.
Yeah.
You know?
And so for me, I think I agree completely. And I think it's, again, it comes back to they don't understand the epistemology they're using as rubbish, right? So an epistemology of declaration followed by online support makes something true. So you're a fox declaratively, and then other anime avatars support that, therefore it becomes true. And I'm like, that's not actually, that's not a particularly robust method of truth validation.
Let's bring that to something extremely basic. That's the story of the emperor not wearing clothes.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the emperor says he's wearing clothes, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, he's wearing clothes," and then someone's like, "No, actually, he's not." There is a material reality behind the social construction of reality that needs to be reckoned with.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And even that, like, I get why you would say that with like a Marxist background, and I agree that, like, I would almost quibble with the material aspect of it just because I know how you're using it. But I agree completely that the declarative epistemology, declaration plus online mob is the worst. It's a terrible way of validating truth, right?
But it makes for a great religion.
Well, so that was going to be the next question, as we were going backwards and forwards trying to like land where we want to do on topics. I got a couple of them, but this is a leading question, but I want you to like use it as a launching pad. How, Rhyd, is politics like religion?
They're the same. There's a quote from Soren Kierkegaard, and I don't remember what it's from. I encountered it through Batsai. It's what looks like politics and imagines itself to be political will one day unmask itself as a religious movement, and that for the most part, let's go back for a second too. There's the Carl Schmitt point, which Carl Schmitt is of course super problematic, but most people don't know who he is. So they, we've probably already been canceled enough anyway that it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Carl Schmitt was the lead juridical theorist for the Nazi regime. And he had brought up the point that all modern state institutions, all political institutions are merely carryovers or evolutions or barely concealed continuations of theological institutions. His point was that the one omnipotent God was replaced with the one omnipotent lawmaker. And then, of course, when you apply that to liberal democracy, there's a reason why it's, Vox Dei, Vox Populi, but now it's Vox Populi, the people speak, therefore that is the voice of God. We still have that sense of this monotheist center of God there that we are responding to. So when the masses say, oh yeah, it's like this, then, that's the truth. We have created this through all of these social processes. Yet again, stepping back, I can't remember if I don't mention them there. I mention it in another essay, but David Graeber and Marshall Salins in their book on Kings, they create a brilliant anthropology of the way that ancient animist cultures saw kingship and therefore political institutions. And they kind of project the state back way much further than it should be. But their point is that the truth of the community is invested into this political order. But that political order and a religious order, there was no difference for them. In fact, political didn't apply because they didn't have the concept of the polis, like that there was a, but it was always recognized that it was just inside of, the realm of the humans for which that applied, but it did not apply outside. There was always this outside that was threatening to kind of come in and destroy the whole thing. I mentioned in a recent essay, A Plague of Gods, on the idea that the sacred was always something that was invading the mundane and you had to push out. And religion and politics together were the way that you kept the sacred at bay. You kept the gods where they were supposed to be, you placated them, you know, you made requests to them, etc. This is merely continued, you know, it continued through Rome, through the Christian order. Our order is still technically Christian, even though you tell a liberal, no, we're secular or whatever. So, no, you're not.
No, you're not. No, yeah, you're more practicing Christians than the Pope. But anyway, no. So that's kind of what I was going at before. I find this really interesting that when we talk about religion, we're talking about, or the continuum between religion and politics as the same thing is very much a European context, which is why I think, and this might sound crazy when you think of like Cambodia and Peru and China and so on, why kind of leftist frameworks never quite got traction in cultures that weren't in relation to the sacred that way, weren't in relation to the sacred as an externality that had to be mediated, or else it caused chaos. If you're kind of embedded in a more than human world, then the whole framework of how you organize reality, like the polis and what a king means and whether a king should have factories and all this stuff is absurd in like, the deserts of Australia. It's just nonsense in that more embedded context. And that's kind of what I think one of the outcomes I want from this is for people to realize that politics is religion, and it is specifically a manifestation of that speaking of problematic, that problematic European experience with the sacred we've had for 2,500 years. Like, it's not even Christian, it is, but it was Greek before that, right? Like there's a squeamishness to it and a need to have everything where it's supposed to be. So yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
No, you go, because I was gonna follow. Actually, no, I will. I think we landed on it already, but it was like, what kind of religion is it? And it's a European one, but as we move into Ressentiment, I presume I don't know, maybe you did, you didn't, but I first came by that term via Saul Newman and post-anarchism and whatever. And so we'll get to Ressentiment in a minute, but he describes politics, but in general, kind of his critique of left politics, including anarchism, as being a Manichaean religion. And it's funny, like I kind of want to modify that and make it Gnostic. So Manichaean, I think, is too specific, but I get why. It's the kind of purity and it's the purity of not being in power, which we'll talk about. But if you make it Gnostic, you actually kind of, how to say this? It's not just a puerile reaction as much as it is a tactic. Like Gnosticism was essentially trying to, whilst it certainly had the Ressentiment tension, it would also have techniques for how it understood liberation. Whereas Manichaeanism, less so. It was more a description of a reality of good guys and bad guys. So that's where, like, from politics, it was going to be moving from politics to what kind. But yeah.
I would actually, because you mentioned the Greeks, like I would actually say that there's a Neoplatonist problem with
it. Well, that's what I mean. Absolutely.
When we're looking at the, there's the idea that there is an ideal society in which humans, I mean, this is the root of the use of the word economy or economia from the Greeks into the Catholic Church. So there is this idea that there is an ideal way of managing the transfers of wealth within society, and that was originally just how do you manage a household. Suddenly it was, how does God want an entire society to be managed? And this is carried over, I think, in all politics. Whether you're talking about right wing or left wing politics, there's still this idea that there is an ideal solution for a nation, and that nation. The household, that imagined community of this, these are the people here. How do we manage them properly? This has particularly been a problem from the birth of capitalism, I would specifically say, because before that, there was no attempt to well, actually, there's a better way of putting it. The bourgeoisie, the new class of capitalists who were the ones who were the left in the French Revolution, they wanted to behead the aristocrats so that they could bring in a new capitalist order. They wanted money, they wanted power. Now we have factories, great, let's get rid of the monarchs who are standing in our way. But they were a management class. They took particularly Calvinist ideas, and they applied them in new jobs, particularly accountancy, and other administrative tasks. They became the colonial administrators. They became the accountants who were counting how many slaves you could have in a boat before they would all die. They were the ones who were managing this new transfer of wealth. And so right now, capitalism is a management ethic. How do we manage all of this wealth and the transfers? How do we keep it with some people? How do we, keep the people who don't have it from ever wanting more of it, et cetera? And all of this comes from, again, this Neoplatonist idea that there is an ideal that if you can reach this ideal state of humanity, this utopian sort of manifestation, or it's Christian, of course, but the Christians got that from them. Yeah. Then you will have a perfect society. Then you will have everything in order. The funny thing is, so you mentioned in Marxism and with anarchism, both of them are subject to this exact same problem. In fact, I go between being described an anarchist and a Marxist. Honestly, autonomous Marxist works best. I have nothing in common with American anarchists anymore. I just don't. Watching the way that they just fell apart during Trump, and then worse, like when Biden got elected, and then like with their.
I'm more inclined to believe people are clouds than they are anarchists in America.
Oh yes. I mean, why not? Anything goes, right? Yeah. But they have this idea that there is a ideal state of human relationships and communities that, you can get rid of hierarchy eventually if we just do this, and we're always questioning each other. We're always looking into our souls to make sure that we're pure. Have I sinned against my brother or sister? If I have, then I should confess. Or if I do not confess, then I will be forced to do a mass confessional, from a cancel culture crusade. This is no different. This is merely a continuation of the Christian management ethic that came through Calvinism. I'm neither Catholic nor Protestant, but honestly, if I had a choice, I would desperately want the Catholics to have power again, because good gods of the Protestants fuck this up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that, but that's kind of almost rounds off the religion component, but not quite. So because we were sort of chatting about this over email, and I want people to think of it this way as we move into some specific concepts. But as far as I can tell, and we're sort of talking around it, but politics, and we'll get to whether you can or even need to be political, but before we do, we have to see it this way, I think. Politics should give you a way of seeing the world as one thing, and then consequently what to do in it, right? And so that when you look at the extreme dysfunction of it's the same challenge, it's just the self-declared left, like the idea that you can declare yourself a anarchist and put BLM on your Twitter and then vote for the guy who wrote the 94 crime bill should blow up your head. It should go like boom, right? Because you are a fraud on one of those things, or both of them, right? And it's that faulty metaphysics of politics should give you a way of seeing the world and then what to do in it. And there's sort of less of a critique of the idea that, non-white people suffer worse police violence. Like, I'm on board with that, no question. But then it's like, therefore I'll vote for Biden. Seems like that's where you lose me. But it's not even a critique of that individual action as much as it is, or criticism of that individual action. It's to understand that politics gives you a way of seeing a map, and then an implied framework of intervention or non-intervention, which I think is important. But what do you reckon?
Well, so I would say my mind has changed on this. For a long time, I just thought that there was some sort of short circuit going on within people's worldviews, within these frameworks. Like, how could you make this one, and then do this thing that is completely contrary to everything else? But I don't think so any longer. I think it is a complete worldview for them. It's just that, there are two things. Like, the only reason why you would ever put BLM on your Twitter is so that everybody knows you're cool. You're not actually fixing anything for Black people in the United States by saying Black Lives Matter on a social media account. You are doing nothing. That is virtue signaling. And I don't like the thing, but you're also doing it for yourself as well. I need to be a good person. And I think underlying that apparent knot where, wait, how can you do this and yet do that, is they're trying to be good. They're trying to be good throughout the entire thing. So I oppose police violence against Black people. And that makes me a good person. And in order to keep being a good person, I also need to vote for Biden because Biden is the good choice. See, I'm a good person here. I'm a good person here. And if I keep being good, then maybe God will change everything for us. If we just believe more, then Black people will stop dying. If we just believe more, then the environment will get fixed. If we believe more, and that's what it is. So I think we just need to shift it isn't that they are confused. It's just that we miss what the core politics is. And the core politics is, a politics of being a morally good person, both to themselves and to other people. And whatever falls into that category of good is what they'll do, what they'll stand for. I'll recycle, I'll do this, I'll buy carbon credits and BLM, but this because I need to be good, not because I want to change anything, but I want to be good.
So that's that's useful. Sorry. So it's not a framework of incoherence, it's a framework of coherence built around a obviously idiotic conception of the good, but that leads quite well, I think, into Ressentiment, which was a big part of the essay and also one of the things we want to discuss there. So, what's Ressentiment, Rhyd?
So, I'm sorry, you said earlier, where did you encounter the term first?
Saul Newman in Post-Anarchism.
I don't actually know who that is.
Yeah, there's a good little, a lot of it read. I think that's one of the reasons I resonated with the Here Be Monsters piece, because he has, can't remember the name of it, it's on the Anarchist Library. I'll put it in the show notes for this, a decent essay on Ressentiment where he calls, it's this, right? Like he's saying this is the left has a Manichaean religion of the people who are in power are definitionally bad. And not just that, but to not be in power is a generation of virtue. Right, so it actually kind of spins it out. But
I have this distracted thought that I just really need to bring up. I think I mentioned it a little bit in one of our email conversations before. But so you mentioned the Anarchist Library.
Yeah,
Anarchist Library was maintained by a man named Aragorn. Aragorn ran Little Black Press. Aragorn was widely considered a fascist by the United States social justice, Antifa, liberal, whatever you want to call it. He had his tires slashed. People would rip up his books. He even, there was a fist fight at I think it was the Seattle Anarchist Book Fair. He was not there, but someone else was there selling his books. And there was a fist fight because they were like, yeah, you're fascist, you need to get out of here. And what was funny is Aragorn was actually running the servers for the Seattle Anarchist Library. And he's like, well, I'm going to continue to do this because you guys are just idiots. But anyway, so that just reminded me, as soon as you said that, I'm like, yeah, there is this Aragorn was a great example of someone who didn't fucking care about being good.
No.
But instead cared about, if I believe this, then this means that I should do something else.
I think, and that's one of the, we'll get to Identitarianism, right? But that's one of the things that it's one of the reasons I will resist labels. Or that's why I made one up a few years ago. I identify as a Le Guinist anarchist, right? Like, because it's space and the kind of Kropotkin-esque relationality. So I made one up. I made up Le Guinist anarchism, right? Because I
used to call myself a Chestertonian Leninist.
There you go, right? Because you just look at we've critiqued the kind of shitlib wing of declared leftism, but it doesn't mean that the shit doesn't stink amongst purported radicals who will just call each other fascist. Some are, for sure, but it'll just call each other fascist, almost like a spin the wheel. And I think Aragon would be a good example then of like, I don't care. I can't care because I am adhering to these politics. And
actually, so, and this is a good segue to the resentment thing, because it was, you know, I had an interesting relationship with Aragon. He actually recorded 4 different podcasts of us, but he never aired them because my Marxism was just a little bit too much for him, and also because he was a pretty hardcore atheist. But you know, we had a great bizarre relationship. I admired the fuck out of that guy because he could get his stuff smashed. He could have all of these people constantly smearing him all of the time and say, yeah, I'm just going to keep publishing. And when I would experience very similar thing, I've been canceled. Gods and Radicals has been canceled so many times. I've had writers tell me, I've had funders telling me, hey, you know, I'm getting pressured by all of these people on the outside to have nothing to do with you. Like, hey, I'm sorry, I have to stop funding you. You know, sorry, I can't be associated with you anymore. And it's like, oh, okay. You know, now I can say, oh, okay. And what brought me to that was the concept of resentment, like understanding that concept. So my introduction to it was through Deleuze, but I'd heard the concept before. In fact, of all people, Jack Donovan mentions it a lot. But I'd never understood it until I need to read this. And it fucking changed my life because it. First of all, so to explain resentment. Resentment is the sense, it's a moral framework where, because I have suffered and something is wrong in me, something is not healed, something I do not feel like I can enjoy things again, then 1, I am a good person because the people who did these bad things to me must therefore be evil. And 2, this is the state of morality for everyone else. It kind of spreads. A great example is I'll use an example from my own life. I used to have these problems in relationships very often where something was going wrong. I felt hurt, whatever. And I would blame the person who did not understand what they had done wrong, or maybe did understand, but decided to act anyway. Saying, well, you can deal with it. Like, come on, grow up. And I would have this sense like, well, because they have harmed me, I am not the sort of person who, 1, I would never do what they do. Like, I would never hurt them. 2, I would never have done that to me. How could they have done that to me? Such a horrible thing. And then 3, I am a good person. I am good. I am righteous because I suffer. And they are evil. And Nietzsche, he brings it up as it's a slave morality, where the people who are stuck in servile conditions, who see the people above them, and he uses the example of the aristocrats, they, instead of challenging that political order that puts them at the bottom, they create a morality in which they are actually at the top in their head. Because they suffer so much, they are so good. And this is the core of a lot of the Christian ethic. The more you suffer, like the more holy you must be. It's the saint, it's the martyr. Look at how I have suffered. I have suffered for God. Therefore, I am, due some great reward. But resentment takes that further great reward in the afterlife and tries to create an entire moral system, which is also a political system on earth that says, I don't do this. This has been done to me, whatever it is. And it's, it is the same logic, the anti-Semitist, the person who says, the Jews are controlling everything, and they're switching my coffee for decaf, they at some point have had the sense that they are being wronged, and then they have identified a false, or perhaps actually someone hit them on the street and that person was Jewish, but they have made the wrong connection and have therefore decided there is this group, the Jew, who is after them, who is controlling them, who has caused them harm. And then they build an entire morality, an entire ethic where they are righteous, and the evil people who are trying to destroy the righteous people are the Jews. So therefore, I need to fight against them. I need to, whatever. But this is the same thing that's happening within, social justice identity politics, in woke politics, in the conversations about critical race theory in the United States right now, where it's merely inverting the hierarchy. It's merely saying, hey, so Black people have been historically treated like shit within the United States. Therefore, they're good. And that means all white people are bad. And it's just like, it's taken the racist idea that Black people are inferior and just merely said, no, they're up here and white people are down here. It has changed nothing. It is just, again, it's a slave morality. It's inverted it, but nothing else. Yeah.
The Christian, the reference to it being, similar in framework, or frankly identical in framework to Christianity, is interesting, because last year I was chatting to Chris Knowles about this, and he hit on something that hadn't occurred to me before. But one of the things that made Christianity so dangerously successful was it has that persecution framework, whilst it is the most powerful organization in Europe for 1,500 years. So it's a double danger in it, which is this like Manichaean Ressentiment thing, but run by the ruling power. So the Pope, the most powerful human who ever lived in 1400, will give sermons about being, oppressed and hiding in catacombs and so on, while dripping in jewels. And here we are in 2021, and the CIA has woke ads. And so you have like the most dangerous kind of like wet work infrastructure mankind's ever come up with, which is the CIA.
Yeah, the brilliance of a non-binary CIA agent complaining about I've been so oppressed, but then I was able to find my identity there. It's so cute.
Find your identity, collapsing left governments in South America.
Exactly. Or there was a comic that it gets used again and again, and it's brilliant. But it first appeared when Obama was elected. It was a picture of two apparently Muslim Arabic looking people, and Obama is falling on them, and they're like, I am so glad that we're being bombed by a Black president now. And then it's changed hey, I'm so glad that I'm going to be bombed by a woman president or whatever. That's, that this, I don't know what, sorry, I want to scream sometimes. Yeah. But, what appears to be happening is a new transition of this religious framework is coalescing within the empire, as it were, where, now that for the most part, people no longer see themselves as Christian, but they still need that same political framework, that same, authoritarianism, that same hierarchy that it creates. We're we are oppressed, and therefore we can do whatever we want. The Iraq War, the Afghanistan, it was a great example of it. Hey, they try to take our freedom, so we got to kill them, and the same thing, hey, they're hurting gays over there, so we got to bomb all of them, including the gays. It's been coalescing, I think, since the War on Terror, the Patriot Act, but now with Biden and Kamala Harris, where even the corporations all got together to try to silence Trump because he was terrifying to them. And now here's the new order. The cardinals have spoken. They have burned the white smoke has come out of the chimney. This is our new religious order, and I feel like they're encouraging as best they can, this to coalesce. Right? Where you know,
Yes,
to pick
yeah.
the CRT debates going on right now in the United States, where if you at all question critical race theory, you are a racist. Which is, if you at all criticize or question the infallibility of the Pope, then you are anathema. You are a blasphemer. You know, it's the same, and you know, we've seen this with all of the other cancel stuff, left and right. You know, but now it's that line is so you have these black Marxists who are like, okay, I'm gonna shut up now because you all are idiots. You know, like, I'm critiquing this. You're telling me I am a racist. I am an Uncle Tom. I am a whatever, because I do not like this theory that you are pushing that actually doesn't change my material circumstances at all.
Well, it's not designed to, right? So that's, you know, CRT is something that literally Goldman Sachs uses in human resources. That's not a radical, that is not a tool of freedom. That is capitalism defending itself, to, you know, borrow from Mark Fisher, right? Which brings me to a question, and I'm going to answer it. What was that?
Go ahead.
So
no, my favorite. I was shown several essays. They're like, no, you don't understand CRT. You need to read this. I'm like, okay, I'll read these. Almost every single one of them was like, hey, just so you know, we are not Marxist. Like, you know, this is not Marxist at all. Like, we are okay with capitalism. We just need to make it more fair. I'm like, you know, all right, yeah. Don't show me any more of these. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah. So talking about this, this anointed ideology, and I think it's both, so I'm going to answer it that way because you kind of went to both. Do you think it was generated with the intention of becoming the sort of new ideological justification and organization of empire? Do you think it was created for that? Or do you think it was a cynical co-opting over the last couple of decades? And I think it's both. I think is probably the right answer.
That's the Marxist framework of recuperation, you know, and I think it is definitely recuperation. So the best analysis I heard was, I can't remember, it's the brother of the professor who was at Evergreen State College, and you know, he had to hide in a police station because everyone wanted to hurt him because he didn't want to stay home on the day that they said all whites need to stay home from the campus.
So this is one of the Weinsteins,
whatever. Yeah. It was the brother of that guy, that professor, which, you know, I'll say too, I knew about that instance when it happened. I was in the United States, or I was in Europe. I had just I think I had just arrived in France right around that time. I had friends going to Evergreen, and I was like, oh wow, like, so are you part of that? And they're like, no way. And I'm like, wait, you're more leftist than I am. What's going on? They're like, I don't want to talk about it. So I went back, and this is a few months ago, and I went back and I looked at that situation like, oh fuck, okay, that's Robespierre. That's the terror right there. You know, at no point is he saying anything even slightly racist. All he's saying actually is, hey, the way to address racism is not to reify race by saying whites cannot do this, black people should do this, you know. No. This is, if we want to undo race, or if we want to do on racism, we need to undo race. We need to challenge that thing. But it was his brother who had said that it seemed as if, you know, the political powers and the corporations had both decided it was too difficult. And there were diminishing returns trying to make any sort of concessions to labor, you know, labor as the working class in general. It's too expensive. It's too expensive for them. You know, the United States, you know, as I said, it has not had any general strike in a long time, but suddenly in the last 6-7 years, you've seen people start talking about Marx, you know, people wearing guillotine necklaces. Like there's this idea that, you know, hey, actually we can change this. And his statement was, it was easier to just give symbolic gifts, symbolic rewards, symbolic rights to certain people, and start focusing on identity instead of material conditions. If you hire, you know, you can fire 1,000 people, you know, and if most of them are white, then those white people are going to be upset. But if you then also hire 100 people and most of them are black, then you've just divided the working class, where all of these people are like, hey, we lost our jobs. But the corporation can say, we have increased diversity, you know, but the net loss is 900 jobs. You can continue to do this in little bits everywhere, and it's very useful. You know, especially too with all of the Black Lives Matter protests. You know, I think the thing that terrified them the most was not the burning of the police station, but it was the looting. You know, when people stop deciding that the sacred order of property is inviolable, when they start saying, hey, you know, we have nothing, I'm gonna, you know, my favorite is it's like a guy with a crock pot and a comforter. Yeah. You know, it's like, I want to be comfortable and I want to cook. You know, my mom will love this, you know. So you look at all those events, that's more terrifying, I think, than any of the protests were, anything else. The moment that people said, no, actually, we want material benefits. We don't want to starve.
It's one of those fantasies in retrospect, right? Like I think about all the corporations like Starbucks that tweeted their support, and I think, okay, then break in and take the cash out of the cash registers and give them to the people protesting. Any corporation that says we support BLM, go and take their shit. And it's one of those things you wish you can't. It doesn't happen in those kind of mass protest moments that it can be coordinated and coherent, but you fantasize about how much more effective, not that it wasn't effective, as you said, terrified them, but that scare could have gone further. That's any corporation that tweets Black Lives Matter, go and take their shit, like be targeted about it. Anyway.
Right. Exactly. so you know, that I think was a very critical moment for them, where they realized, okay, we need to quell this. The way we can quell this is giving Black people symbolic rights. You know, we can say, okay, now in all of these schools, we're going to teach people about how you are oppressed. It's like, oh, great. That doesn't change anything, you know, but hey, at least now I feel like, you know, I'm being heard. But you're still not going to get reparations. You're still not going to get access to healthcare. You're still not going to be able to afford your rent. You're still not going to get access to work. But it's much easier to do that for them. It costs them nothing. You know, BLM on your Twitter, and there you go. You've got it, you know.
They're also insured. Like it is because of how we're structured economically. It's free fucking money that they have, and the people outside. My sister used to be a major human resources manager for entire Target districts. And when the Target, and I think it was Minneapolis, was like raided, she just like looked at me and laughed. She's like, fucking yeah, good for them. Like, and it's Target lost no money here at all. You know, and the Target had even done a statement like, hey, we need national healing, because they're like, well, we didn't lose anything. Hopefully they don't keep doing this. But, you know, and if I remember correctly, that store is closed afterwards. So fair enough. Would have ended up in landfill. So you mentioned something, we're sort of going back to the evergreen thing. We spoke about, is there anything else we want to say about Ressentiment? Because I want to move the religion as politics into specifically where that manifests, which we're kind of there now, in classical left formulations, right? So this Weinstein guy, I know the one you mean, it's not Brett, I think it's the other one. And it might even be Weinstein, whatever. Mentions things like CRT looks like struggle sessions and all the rest of it. And I kind of want to put my hand up and go like, it's actually close. I think it's closer to shining pathism, because it has that left challenge of the proletariat not being interested in the peasantry and not understanding the peasantry, right? And actually hating them. But
there's an Onion article. It was like one of their videos from, I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago. But whenever I try to explain that point to people, I show them this video. It's this guy who, you know, of course he's an actor, and he's talking about Judith Butler, and he's dressed up like a factory worker. He's talking about as a factory worker, and talking about like, wow, I had just been so horrible before. I can't believe that I was doing all of these things. I didn't understand that gender is performative until I had a book club reading with the other guys from the factory of Judith Butler, you know. And it's like, no, it's 900 pages. It is a complete piece of shit. But like showing like, hey, this is the absurd thing, where if you're trying to show these new academic liberatory theories to a dude working in a factory, this is what it's going to look like, and it's absurd. It doesn't work. Or as someone else, a Marxist had pointed out, like, if I go to my hometown and I ask the Latina women there, like, hey, what are your pronouns? Like, do you identify as a woman? I don't know what, they're going to be really offended. Like there's no connection between this urban, and I want to say it's like urban rural, even though the lines are so divided, or so less clearly divided now. But you're going to take this urban thing that people are learning through Tumblr and the university or whatever, and you're going to attempt to apply it to people who are, in the countryside, and say, hey, like, are you she, her? Like, what are you? And a woman is going to look at you like, why are you asking? Right? What's her? And so it's the same thing with all of these other theories.
I live in a little logging town, an hour outside of Hobart, and Tasmania is where Australia's green movement started, and rightly so, in protest to some dams that were going to be put in some of the most pristine and oldest temperate rainforest anywhere on the planet, like 100 million years old and so on, right? But this is a logging town. It's reasonably well managed from a logging perspective. They're not cutting down old growth forest or whatever. Nevertheless, in the lead up to the last election, we had some college students from town, obviously green identifying college students, come down and sabotage some of the logging equipment. Now, the thing about that is that the logging companies subcontract that to small businesses that are family owned in the area, so that the equipment they destroyed was the lifeblood of a family in an economically depressed area. And how do you think we voted in the last election? We voted center-right. Here we are sitting like in the areas that we should be concerned about, I don't want to use the word managing, coming back into right relation with, and we vote center-right. And why is that? Because we have city kids coming down, destroying family businesses in economically depressed areas and thinking they're good for it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And treating them as other. We're treating them as, oftentimes as the oppressor. Like, oh, these people are oppressing, and it's like, yeah, but like, where are you wiping your ass? Like, are you still using toilet? You're participating in this whole thing. What are you doing? But
this comes back to the good, right? Like and this is the important part, again, coming to the takeaways, because I want people to come out of this discussion with an ability to see it, right? And to see that it is a pseudo-reality. This is why I think the Gnostic thing's better than Manichaeanism, but it's a pseudo-reality that is honestly formed as a response of a true thing, but that doesn't make it true. So, our environmental is the way we are in relation to the more than human world up to code. It is not. Do Black people suffer disproportionately police violence, murder, and incarceration? They do. Yes, but you can't make it into this sort of fake game of I am good, well, it's not that you can't make it. The fake game of I am good, and this is where I come back to Mark Fisher, is capitalism defending itself. That's the vampire's castle, because it puts you.
It's always been Slavoj Žižek's point too. Where like the Starbucks, recycled cup, like this cup of coffee like helps the earth, and it's no, it doesn't. But capitalism is so good at selling you goodness, like it, because it knows you want to be good. No one wants to be evil. Like, we just don't, even like when we want to do something really shitty, we still like, is there a way I can justify this so I'm still a good person? We just want to be good. And we have something selling it to us all of the time. They're so good at selling good to us.
Absolutely. Which brings us to, it's actually something you said in the email exchange, which I kind of liked, because why I settled on a few years ago, and it was big, widespread disappointment with stuff around me, as is generally the case, where I'm like, that's it, I'm a Le Guinist. And sometimes I'll add Le Guinist anarchist to it, but I'm like, no, this works for me. I'm just going to say I'm a Le Guinist. Like my favorite anarchist book is The Dispossessed, et cetera, et cetera. When we were chatting via email, let me put it this way. One of the reasons I resist saying post-left is that many of the, not all, but a lot of the leading lights in the post-left over the last, say, 30 years, some of the early ones in particular, like in the 90s and so on, went down, dare I say, a Holocaust denying route, right? So there's a sort of grossness to post-left, which isn't necessarily there because there are awful people wherever. But you said, because I remember in the post that started this all off, right? Like, Here Be Monsters, you had in a footnote, like, even though I'm sure it still says it on the website, like, Marxist pagan or Marxism, paganism, whatever. It's like some days, like some days some days I may not even feel particularly left. And I said, well, do you think you're post-left? And you said, I might be pre-left. Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, okay, so the whole point of any of the work that I've done since Gods and Radicals got founded, since I started writing, was, I had started looking at the Luddites, the white boys, the Rebeccas, all of these early 1700s, mid 1700s movements within England, specifically England, also Ireland as well. The Molly Maguires were a continuation of that within the United States. Many of them, actually all of those groups, had used some sort of symbolic pagan figure as their head. So Ned Ludd, depending on who you asked, was either a king who lived under a hill near a church in Sherwood, of all places. He was a pale giant. He was a ghostly ancestor, etc. There's an account of one of the watchmen who's at a factory who fled when the Luddites went in and smashed all of the looms. And he said that they were led by a tall white figure carrying a spear. And you look at this and then you think of like all of the you see this mostly in the Welsh lore about the giants who live in mounds. Or in holes, with them in spears. And so were the Luddites evoking an older pagan myth? Well, it's not 100% clear until you go over to Ireland, when you start seeing that the white boys specifically were issuing eviction notices to landlords in the name of an old Irish goddess, whose name I have completely forgotten right now. She's kind of a rare one. And then the Rebeccas, which were a group that they were levelers in Wales. They cross-dressed, and they cross-dressed because an old crone who lived on a hill had given them all women's clothes and said, hey, I want you to tear all of this down and you need to wear women's clothes. So all of the men wore women's clothes and all of the women wore men's clothes. They were all cross-dressing. So, those are just three, but then I started looking at France, and you see other groups like that there too. And then you see this in Germany as well. One of the interesting things was the Heinzelmenschen, I think, who were the basically kobolds or gnomes who were, helping workers and would retaliate against unfair bosses. So, and also like the Tommyknockers, Stephen King made that film, but that was an old Cornish thing where there were all of these spirits that would, help people before a mine collapse. And oftentimes they would play tricks on the mine owners. So all of this predates Marx, predates the French Revolution. The French Revolution is more important here than Marx, because there was no leftism before the French Revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm happy to hear that you and Connor are talking about this, but this is like something I would like shake into everybody's head whatsoever. Before the French Revolution, there was no left and right. There were all of these other tendencies, but no one even defined it as instead it was hey, I don't like these authoritarian things, I'm going to fight against it. But there was never I'm part of this tendency, yes, or I'm part of this tendency. And that's what I mean when I say I'm more of a pre-leftist. Like, I would love for us to go back to that point, especially because That is right at the point that you see in the American colonies, right at the birth of race. The whole reason why black and white became legal fictions within the colonies was specifically to get the European workers and the African slaves to stop fucking. They were fucking, they were being friends, they were doing stuff together, you know, the settlers were going native, as it were, you know, and they were revolting against their colonial masters. So the only way that they were able to come out was like, okay, so we're going to give these workers some rights, and then, you know, these slaves, whether or not they were slaves or freed slaves later, they are a different category of people, and we're going to pick their color, you know. So, okay, well, see, they're dark skinned, so they are black people. Black people have these legal rights. These other people, they have lighter skin, so they are white people. This could have gone a different way, you know, if those had continued, if that intermixing had continued. And if instead of adopting this bourgeois management model that came from the French Revolution of, well, I'm a leftist, you know, I am against kings or whatever, even though I know some leftists here are like, yeah, kings are okay, you know, like what is the tendency, the red Tory tendency, which Margaret Atwood, for example, is one of the, in Canada, the whole idea, like, yeah, I'm conservative, but everyone should fucking have healthcare, and they should actually be able to survive on their wage. But also, yeah, I think kings are good, you know, so that doesn't fit so well with the left-right dichotomy. But before the left-right dichotomy, you know, we didn't have to think of it. We did not try to manage our political perspectives according to left hand, right hand, or whatever.
And that's what I meant earlier, where like leftism is a critique of industrializing European monarchies. Like it's specifically that, right? And it doesn't, and when you see that, it allows you to be pre-left, because my version of it, again, comes from anarchism, right? Like people don't realize that Kropotkin and friends were serious historians of the Middle Ages, and particularly the Holy Roman Empire. And that's the kind of king or emperor, fine, whatever. And then for 1,000 years, Europe basically ran on anarchist principles of villages self-organizing and towns self-organizing and trading and whatever. Yes, there was a pointless emperor over the top of it, but everyone just kind of left to do their own fucking thing. And that so we have, like, when people look at, and this was Kropotkin's point, but you have, it's like, well, when has anarchism ever worked? It's like for 1,000 years in Europe is this one place, and anarchism is a European, and it has problems, description of stuff that you will find elsewhere in the world. Because if you look at Australia being the best example, the oldest continually practicing cultures on the planet, going 60,000 years, no wars, a few hundred nations hanging out, doing their thing on a continent. And so it's that, this is one of the exciting outcomes I want from a discussion like this, is for people to be able to see that politics in general is how you see the world and what to do. And inside leftism is a version of that, and it doesn't mean there's good in it, but it does mean it is a very specifically range-bound cosmology with kind of like a finite number of acceptable doings. And I just don't think we're there anymore. I don't know.
Well, I would bring up one other thing. I have been promising to write an essay on this for like 4 years now, but Nietzsche is the first one who brought this up, but there's a tendency within leftism, you know, this framework, I guess, you know, sub-religion or, you know, religious tendency, let's call it, to constantly abandon certain ideas that are no longer seen as good, even though those ideas tend to have been what were previously the core of leftist ideology. You know, a good example of this, so currently in the United States, it is extremely anti-leftist, extremely oppressive, extremely, oh my God, how could you possibly do that, you awful oppressor, to say, hey, people should work out. You know, people should take care of their bodies. To say that right now is to have committed this awful sin. And yet, if you look at all of the early communist parties and anarchists, you know, they ran gyms. There was this idea that, hey, we are mutually taking care of each other. Like if you are not healthy, if you're not eating well, hey, let's find you like better food because this food is shit. It's coming from the factory and it's all rotten in the can when you get it. We have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other to be in decent form. And of course, this is not the capitalist model of like, 5% body fat or whatever. Like you look at, you look at the Soviet propaganda posters of what a strong, healthy woman looked like. She looks like a German woman now, like just strong, bulky, plenty of body fat, but she can lift shit, like she's lifting, sacks of grain over her shoulders. The idea that you can even discuss what the human body is capable of any longer now is no longer a leftist idea. So it has been picked up instead by right-wingers. If you look at the Wolves of Vinland, particularly Operation Werewolf, like I have a friend, she's indigenous in, it's outside of Seattle. She wrote me an email like, fucking hell, thank you so much for writing about Jack Donovan and the Wolves of Vinland. You would not believe how many of my tribe all go for their stuff now. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. And it's specifically because they are attempting to return this idea of there being some sort of nobility of the human body. But you can't talk about that in leftism. And leftism keeps, the process is ideological abandonment. And usually that happens through resentment. So for the body stuff, we saw that, especially within the United States, there was a lot of, social shaming going on of people who are overweight. And instead of saying, okay, hey, we need to, let's both help society not treat people like shit, because of this, but also like, hey, okay, so you're obese and you're not healthy, or, you can't hold down a job because you're always tired, or you're not eating well. Let's also fix that. So kind of like, let's fix both. But through the process of resentment, suddenly it was like, hey, people are shaming me. And I can say this as somebody who was a extremely obese child. I always had this idea that everybody was laughing at me. Some of them might have been, but for the most part, they weren't. And I experienced this when I started going to a gym too, where, I'd go there and like, oh my God, everyone sees that I'm fat. No one's looking at me. No one's gym. You are not fucking looking at anybody unless you want to have sex with them. That is it. And, but I had this idea and I was projecting out this thing. That was actually the process of resentment, where I was trying to keep into this idea that there is a trace of trauma inside of me that is defining the world around me. And I am therefore, at first I am oppressed because, oh my God, like I'm not like these other people. Therefore, they must be thinking something bad about me. Therefore, well, actually, I'm the morally good person, so I should leave this gym. That same sort of thing. The fight for body positivity became positivity only for a certain sort of body. And what happened instead is everybody who had the other sorts of body then became they switched it again, where, people up here were seen as good and people down here were seen as bad. And it's like, okay, let's just switch it. So if you have this sort of body, the one that we thought was good before, you are awful, you must be oppressive.
And this gets back to like the Vampire's Castle thing of, oh, what a shock. That once again defends capitalism, because you have like this 100-year process of giving Americans in particular, but Western countries, seed oils and processed foods. And that is a precise graph that goes from like not fat, 1915, 2021, majority obese, including like 6-month-old children. And so this is literally an impact.
In the United States, oh my God, you cannot talk about the stuff that like is giving everybody diabetes. It's like, well, no, that's fat shaming. About this.
And
this
is the only way I am Marxist, but that's literally a capitalist death machine, right? It's literally killing people.
Well, and we have I'm going to review it at some point. I'm terrified of reviewing, but the book Countdown. By this female scientist who had done a very long study of the effects of not phytoestrogens, but basically the petrochemicals that end up changing people's hormones, and saying, hey, this has increased the rate of certain things like hypospadia. There's been all of these birth defects, and it is also causing sperm counts to go down, and it's also causing women to have puberty earlier and earlier and earlier. And there seems to be a correlation, although they don't, go that far, with a lot of the gender fluidity that's happening right now. So we from this thing, they can prove at least these other things that sperm counts are going down, whatever. Industrial capitalism is changing the human body.
Yeah.
But to even say anything about that is then to enter in this terrain where, the reaction I've seen every single time that an article comes up about the sperm counts going down, it's like, oh yeah, fuck men. We're like, actually the majority of the men who are actually experiencing this are the poor Black men that are also being shot by the cops. Like it's like they're just getting destroyed there on both sides, and you have all the social justice people are like, yeah, fuck those men. I'm like, well, okay, those are literally the ones that are getting killed.
So that, I know, I agree completely, and it's caught in the dual thing that I'm really happy we're landing on, which is this sort of framework of how to see the world and then what to do in it. And we'll move into the what to do, because locations of action are determined by how we see the world. And so, like, Charles Eisenstein's my hero in this shit.
I like him, yeah.
Yeah, but he talks about how we need to move past a concept of bigness when it comes to valuing our activity. So you might look like one person against like a sea of absolute challenges, like what can I possibly do about this, is back into that materialist and even capitalist view that more of something is better. And that when you free yourself from that, when you actually, because we've been doing this amongst the premium members this quarter, when you operate at the level of the living field, and why I use that language specifically is in the last 20 years, there's been really good evidence, or really good information and findings in that overlap between frontier science and parapsychology and so on, that around field effects. So around like what, so like the observable impact of one person, and even that's not quite right. But like when you operate at the level of the field, you're no longer bound by the value system of Newtonian physics, right? And it frees you up. And I don't usually like the war metaphors, but it opens you up to sites of action and importance, because people can kind of feel the despair of them not being able to do something, or the challenges being so great. But when you understand that asserting health sovereignty in the face of this death machine is, dare I say, praxis, but it is a site of action. When you see that, it really changes things for you. It really changes how you can show up to each day and kind of show up to a living universe. And I think that's like, because Connor and I, you talk about the things that the left keeps abandoning. They never really, I mean, dialectical materialism is a woolly and dumb idea, but they never really had like a metaphysics in a magical sense. Again,
I like dialectical materialism, but mostly because it's really the Cardo and Taliesin story.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't, but one of the things I will always retain from, and this is talk about things that the left abandons, class reductionism is a name that just is like, if you actually try to do left critiquing in 2021, it's like, well, don't be a class reductionist. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, so I don't like Diamat in particular, but I think history, because the universe is alive, is not reducible to like one mechanism of action or one overriding mechanism of action. Doesn't mean that class politics hasn't informed history, right? Anyway, the point being, one of the things we have left behind, or one of the things the left in many respects didn't have in a coherent way, and thus the right did, and we know that in the history of European esotericism, is a kind of magic, right? And when you can talk about like operating at the level of a field, or being in relation to people who aren't physically present, human or non-human, then again, it's a turn toward optimism in the face of what can sometimes be grim mornings to wake up to, right?
if I can change that, actually, I don't think that it was ever lacking a magic. All right, so let's take an example from fascism first, right? You know, the creation of the Aryan. That was a magical creation. That was not just a, you know, we tend to think of it as a political propaganda, you know. No, they created this idea that this sort of person exists and that we are all part of it, except they're not, so we have to get rid of them, you know. Now, so you see that, you know, that is like basic fascist magic or basic nationalist magic, as it were, because, you know, nations do that all of the time. But the creation of the worker, you know, and I mentioned the Soviet propaganda, like, good gods, like the creation of the worker as a being that we all, you know, or that people found this meaning that, you know, it was this receptacle of, it was an egregore, you know, it came to inhabit so many people. Like, I am a worker, you know, you are not a worker, I am a worker, you know, and also, you know, that is ultimately, you know, that I kind of helped prevent a lot of wars for a while when people start saying, wait, no, those soldiers over there that are trying to kill me, they're workers. I'm going to lay down my gun and see if they lay down. Oh, no, we're both workers. Okay. It's always had a kind of magic. And I would also say dialectical materialism is a magical process.
I think what I meant by having like an effective magic, the worker thing is good. Or maybe it's magic that's not up to code, right? So talking about subjectivity, why I know Saul Newman is he wrote Post-Anarchism, and he wrote Post-Anarchism basically to shine a light on anarchist subjectivity being bound to the existence of a state to rail against. So the subject of the anarchist is tied to the existence of a state that must be destroyed. And post-anarchism is like, actually, no, that's really naive. That's a naive formation of a being, right? And I still don't think he's good enough, because I think we're at a point, and I'm sure you'd agree, maybe you wouldn't, that I think identity and subjectivity must include the more than human to be up to code. And you don't find that anywhere in the left. Like you do if you're talking about egregores or a kind of Platonic idea of a cosmic worker, or like international associations is this idea, sure. But you don't get as much solidarity with rivers as beings, right? And we don't do that. And the right kind of does, even if it's lyrical, right? Like that's a real Tory thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, again, that's why I would say the pre-left is
yes.
Something that we should, you know, what, you know, that was a relationship to that. And yeah, no, you're totally right. The fascists and the right and whatever, and fascist is such a, I think there's probably maybe 1,000 real fascists in the world, honestly. You know, as opposed to the everybody who does not say exactly what I say is a fascist. I think the threat has been incredibly overblown. There are some really violent nationalist movements and some very violent ultra-nationalist movements, but are they fascist? No. And they're not fascist because, you know, as far as the classical definition goes, you know, they are not attempting to control the state. You know, they're not doing a state takeover. You know, Trump was so far away from a fascist. You know, even though he was like voting, when they're like, where was his fascist army? The problem is no. You know, like there's 100 of them. Like that is, you know, the media like blew it up. So, but they've always been good at that that relationship. You know, there's traditionalism and not in the that's kind of a difficult conversation to get into. But if you look at a lot of the traditionalist movements that are happening now, or the neo-traditionalists, or whatever, they are reclaiming, I think, what the left has kind of abandoned completely with their like Eurosecular atheist, like, yes. Or atheist, yeah. We call it. You know, yeah, like indigenous people being like, well, wait, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why do I have to get rid of my entire metaphysics in order to not be oppressed? Isn't that another kind of a, you know?
Absolutely.
Well, right is a lot more like, oh no, you can keep that too, and let's channel it through this. And traditionalism is I think, I know some leftists who've just gone completely traditionalist, and I respect them. I'm like, okay, you know, that's cool. I'm a little worried about some of the tendencies there, but I guess I'm too old to get worried about everything anymore.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you mentioned like with the post-leftists, like, you know, yeah, like some of them went like Holocaust denying, you know, but the vast majority of them did not.
Yeah.
But they were still completely smeared out
Yeah.
of existence.
And yeah, this is, I'm so glad we're here, because it gets to the like, what do we do part of where we are, but like the final bit, coming back to subjectivity and fascism and so on, is kind of how you position yourself towards the state. And what I like about Le Guinism, I'll just turn it into an ism, is you could, and it's a post-anarchist position, but you can like just declare the state in your heart an organized crime group, right? Like, so you can delegitimize it in your heart. It doesn't necessarily need to be destroyed. I think it is being destroyed. Funny, I'll ask you this, right? Like, so I was listening to immediatism the other day, and I forget where Corey got it from, but her definition of, there's a definition of a leftist is, and it's a kind of classic anarchist leftist, anarchist communist thing, right? But like a definition of a leftist is someone who wants to improve the state, and the definition of a radical is someone who wants to eradicate it. And I'm sort of in basket number 3, because I think it's ending anyway. So it's more like, I don't even have an opinion on the existence of the state is currently formulated, because I think it's got less than a decade left. I don't think we have less than a decade left until utopia. I mean, the current formulation of it, these moves, identitarianism and all the rest of it, the panicked moves of like the end game, right? And so I'm like, I wonder where I sit with that. And I think it's just, I delegitimize the state as an organized crime, a body or collection of them in my heart, right?
We pull the state out from all of its connotations when we look at what the state is, and Marshall Sahlins and David Graeber are very good at bringing this out on King. You know, the state is, you know, the order, the thing put in place, the static thing. You know, like and those static things will change, and a lot of them will break. Something else will stand, you know, sure, state its place. But for the most part, it's irrelevant to us. Right? Yeah. I think you're right. Whether the state continues in new forms or whatever, so you know, I would change the leftist being you know, someone who wants to improve the state, and just that's usually what I define as liberals. Yeah, liberals. Sure. The progressives, like, okay, you know, that's the whole point of CRT, is to improve the way that the state treats Black people. Yeah. But ultimately, so little effort is actually being done to live without the state, live despite the state. You know, so much of our attention is brought up into, oh, this is the way things are, the system. You know, you could just say the system in place of the state, and we're fighting against this esoteric, you know, occulted thing that doesn't really exist the way that we, you know, the way that it inhabits us. And with all of our politics, all of our religion, you know, all of our ideas oriented always in opposition to, you know, the state, the system, the way things are, we lose energy. You know, I've been wanting to bring this up the entire time. Every single time you say Le Guin, the beauty, the core beauty of her anarchism, which is interesting, because she specifically said, "No, yeah, you know, thanks for calling me an anarchist, but you know, not exactly, you know." And she said, "You know, I'm a Taoist."
Yeah.
And that is really the, you know, you had brought up, you know, what happens when doing is fraught. Like, what happens when our reactions are kind of part of the problem, like, you know, our actions. Like, Taoism is that, well, don't act. Do you need to act? Do you really need to act? And if you need to act, you should have thought about this for a long time, you know, and you will know when that tiny moment of action is required. And you do that, and then you withdraw, and you watch whatever happened unfold. You know, you drop the seed and you walk away, because you cannot make that seed grow. You can create the conditions for it, but it's out of your hands. Yeah. And I think moving beyond the left-right dichotomy, you know, or coming to something else, like, so much of our effort is wasted on trying to do the right thing by continuously doing, as opposed to stopping for a moment and saying, well, wait, what is required here? Is there anything that I can do that can change this? Not yet. Let me do something else instead.
Yep.
And yeah, so when you bring, Le Guin up repeatedly, like that's the beauty of the anarchism-ish thing that she
exactly.
That's the beauty of Le Guinism.
Le Guinism, correct, because it's so when and where you act requires you to understand what universe you're in. Is the universe alive? Are you in a living cosmos? Are you in a machine cosmos, right? And that's why, like, Le Guinism, I have to add the anarchism to it because she didn't, because you're completely correct. She wrote The Dispossessed as her kind of like coming to terms with Kropotkin and what other societies could look like. And a bunch of her less good books, although I still like Word for World is Forest, are about things like Vietnam and her trying to find, and her critiques of China in the telling and all this. So she's doing what I think we should do, which is to find out how to be in a world where things like that happen and where one can intervene and where one can do something. So it's meta, right? Because she's writing books that describe it, but the existence of the books is her response to it.
Right. There's a short story that I almost never hear cited, but The Day Before the Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
You know that one? So it's right before The Dispossessed, or the world that The Dispossessed takes place and happens.
Yeah.
And there's a line where Odo, who is the, for everyone who doesn't know, like Odo, who is the grandmother of this revolution, basically. She is she's kind of Le Guin as well,
Yeah.
But she's passing by a square full of drug addicts. They're all drunk on, I think it was called Flybane or something. And she looks at that and she says, she thinks to herself, like, I used to have sympathy for these people. I don't any longer. The only thing that matters to me is they can do whatever they want. They can destroy themselves any way they want. But in the world I want to create, no one will profit from them doing so. And that I think is like what would be a beautiful core of, a religious idea. That is a religious idea. Like I cannot change their circumstances, but I can make it so that there's no one who is making sure they continue doing this so that they can profit. Well, let them choose as they want, but let's take out the people who want to force their choice.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. Which sort of like as we're into the doing section, this is another leading question. And we're kind of there, but do you even have to be political?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, like the, outcome, what are the outcomes or the intended outcomes? And actually that is the question.
Yeah.
What for? So, I write, really, I'd rather just write gay werewolf erotica, which, by the way, I just released one. So if anyone wants to read gay werewolf erotica, that's what I'd rather write. And I do now, I write fiction occasionally, but I work within the framework of politics specifically because it serves what I want to accomplish. And what I ultimately want to accomplish is that when I write something, people question everything they thought about a situation. And, sometimes their extreme anger is part of it. I get people who are like thinking about me for days, writing about how Rhyd Wildermuth is an awful white nationalist wannabe, crypto, fascist,
Yeah. It's fun to live rent free in people's heads, though, Rhyd. Anyway.
Well, so that's the point. Like that's the my ideas have just inhabited them, and they cannot get rid of them. And they're screaming about how awful I am is them attempting to wrestle, with these ideas that they've just been infected with, and what that means afterwards, I don't know. I cannot shape what their world will look like after all of that anger. Maybe they will just, oh, I fucking hate any white dudes ever like that guy. You know, maybe that's the end result. Or maybe at some point they will have some thought process, some new thought process that they had never encountered before will have been triggered, and that will keep cycling. And even if they never do anything political, even if they never do anything pagan, even if, like, you know, whatever, this process continues in them. And it's no longer me, it's not me at all. I've just kind of helped try to set that. That's why I continue to work within this political framework, despite the fact that, honestly, that's the only politics I do. The rest of my life now, I used to be an activist, used to be on the street. Like, I was a social worker, I was a union organizer, I fucking did everything, you know, every protest, I was fucking out there. Got myself arrested a few times. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore because it does not serve my goals. It does not serve the outcome that I want. I write within a political framework because this is a useful framework for these processes to start, you know, growing. You know, this is how I plant seeds. I cannot determine how those are, but this is how I plant them. Does one need to be political? No. You know, like, one of the most political things you can do right now, one of the most revolutionary things you could do right now is eat well, you know, or go fucking make love to your partner or to yourself. You know, those are things that are much more profound, I think, than screaming, and definitely more profound than, you know, hashtag BLM.
Yeah.
You know?
That's kind of the trick, right? So everything is political. It began, and sounds like it's a critique of feminism. It's not, but when like the personal became political, what's actually happening there is a state co-option of your entire reality, and so so you're caught in a state-based prison when you think everything is political, because actually that's a spell, and that's a spell that has a counterspell, which is like, no, it isn't. Particularly when yeah, jump in. Yeah.
I think I have two essays like in the works, but one of them is specifically on joy, and I think joy is the absolute best counterspell to this. Like, joy is probably the only thing that still continues to be, continues to resist this politicization. You know, because right-wing people experience it, left-wing people experience it, babies experience it, old people, they experience it, you know, people in power experience it, people who are not in power experience it. It is something that we can all individually cultivate. Yeah, we can cultivate the circumstances in our lives that increase this joy, and we can continue to have joy. And joy then teaches you how to resist the politicization of other things, to get rid of that, you know, rent-free space that you've been giving to, you know, to your sexuality, you know, for example, or to what you eat, or, you know, to where you work, or to who you love, or, you know, any of those things. Like, you can start doing that from a place of joy. And I don't mean there's an anarchist book that's like shit, it's called like Joyful Militancy. I don't mean like that, because that's their concept of joy is utterly despairing. It is just, oh, no, joy is the ecstatic release when you experience raw life again, you know, outside of the, it's Zoe, like, yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And funnily enough, that's the end of the counterspell to everything is political. To say no, it isn't, is an ultimate political move. Like, you make politics small. You make it your bitch rather than it being yours. No, your bitch rather than you being it.
Yeah, like what you just said is oppressive. No, it's not.
No, it's just, no, it isn't.
No, it's not, and that's it. You know, or, you know, your words caused harm. No, they didn't. You know, and that's it. You know, or I can't remember in what it. I think it's in it's going to Guin again. It's in the Ursula thing where they just say avert.
Yes.
You know. Yeah. That's it. Just go.
Is that like one of the questions from Milana is, and it's going to be my response to it. It's basically, what do you do in this horrible online world of pseudo left politics and they're for her in many ways a deja vu for someone coming from an ex-socialist country, in her case Yugoslavia, in that they remind me of the careerist tedium of apparatchiks appropriating the ideological lingo and utilizing the carte blanche of the dictatorship of the proletariat for pure personal advancement and social advertisement, often applying political censorship for settling personal scores, and in my case, getting rid of professional competition. Just how much is this new ideological purity fever in what calls itself the political liberal left in the West just another form of simple conformism with religious moralistic undertones rather than an ideological issue? It's a long question, but she said, apologies for that. The self-serving thing is it's identical. It's people saying the party line for their own benefit. But this comes back to the no, it isn't. What one does about that is kind of like you delegitimize the state in your heart. You just commit to not responding to bullies and not being bullied. You just be like, nope, that's it's simple. And I think we're at that no, it isn't moment. It's an inflection point I've noticed culturally. Like, it's been horrible the last few years, but I think enough people are so sick of it now that it's reached the apogee where it's the CIA operating procedures. I think people are ready to just be like, no, it isn't, to a lot of this now. I think that's where we are.
I think too, like, you know, with there was a part of the question, like, what do you do in this sort of social media milieu?
Yeah.
To get off the internet.
Exactly.
You know, so much of this, I noticed this process when I went on my first pilgrimage, which eventually got me into Europe. You know, I went camping and hiking in Bretagne for, I think it was like 6 weeks or something. And I noticed in the first 5 days when I'm hiking around all of these ancient standing stones in Karnak along the shore, it's a beautiful place. I am constantly composing Facebook posts in my head.
Yeah, right.
This is years ago. This is you know, I had only gotten on Facebook, I think, in 2012. I had resisted it for quite some time. And it's just 2015, and I'm, you know, how would I write this to everybody? Oh, you know, like, and then it was like day 4 or 5 when I really started noticing, holy fuck, why is this in my head? I'm going to stop doing this, and doing, you know, saying no, I'm not, or no, then allowed me to actually experience what I was seeing instead of through this filter.
Absolutely.
And that the social media, there's a it's a rhetoric, or it's the mental process that it colonizes all of us. We constantly replicate it, where I've noticed my writing changes according to, you know, what is the current of you know, what people are posting on Facebook or Twitter. And so the best solution to that is just, you know, to get off of it, or to highly limit your use. You know, my for Twitter, I've got a timer that's 5 minutes. I cannot deal with Twitter for more than 5 minutes. I will scream. My timer for Facebook is 30 minutes per day, and I'm like way under that all of the time. And even that is a little bit too much. But if you want to get away from these things, you just don't
just
engage.
do it. Yeah. So I quit Facebook in something like 2014 because I was standing at the bus stop in London waiting to go to work, and I looked at Twitter on my phone, and there was no Facebook on my phone. There's nothing there, and I put it in my pocket, and then I picked it back up, like without even thinking, just like seconds later, and I'm like, that's it, it's gone. And I stopped using it that day, and I stopped using Twitter in January of this year, again because I'm fucking sick of pylons and the rest of it, and it changed how I experienced the more than human world as well. I've been hiking in Cradle Mountain and all this other stuff that I used to, I'm not sure if, and I guess being honest, maybe it was a little bit part of it. Some of the things I would do for the gram, like I would go certain places or think of things, or this will make a great picture for Twitter. And once you get that off your phone and stop doing it, you're in reality. And this is this is kind of why I think Gnosticism is better than Manichaeism to describe this pseudo reality that we began with, because it is this matrix-like artifice where you can just, like, that's not reality. And this is the level that people are arguing at. And you can actually just, no, it isn't, to the whole thing.
I would add one thing that I think for anybody who really wants to experience a short circuit that will help them get out of the social media thing. Be on a bus or at a bus stop or in any other public place where there are other people looking at their phones. Look at their phone. Like open up your Facebook, look at your thread or stream or feed or whatever, and look at someone else's. And you'll realize, wait, no, they have a completely different experience of this thing than mine. This is this weird personalized thing, but everybody has these strange personalized things. This company has just brilliantly convinced us that when we look at this thing, we are looking at the world, but everybody else is looking at a completely different world. And yet we all have this sense that, oh, this shows us the world. It shows us nothing. It shows us what it's decided we want to see.
Yeah.
And it also decided what we're not allowed to see. Just as a brief thing, I've been fascinated by the COVID leak, COVID lab leak thing, where Facebook, Twitter, Google all completely made it so that you could not read articles on it. And then a month and a half ago, they said, oh, actually, you can read those again. So like before you had even posted anything on it, they would make sure no one saw that. And now they're like, okay, we can open that up again. And just that tiny little thing, that weird way that it creates consensus is happening for all of these other things. If you write the word white on Facebook, it will immediately get throttled. So a lot fewer people will see that. You write the word black, same thing, They're controlling what world you see. So the best thing is to, no, I'm going to go see the world.
Be like, remove it. Especially as that's both hiding the lab leak theory and then promoting it is state propaganda, and the change in it is in a lead up to an attempted war with China. And it's like, right. Anyway, so leave it all behind. There is no reality to be had there. Leave it to the self-identified clouds. But okay, next question. I recently rewatched Can't Get You Out of My Head. One of the threads was the Germans lost, but the Nazis won, remaining in the bureaucracy and systems of modern society. I wonder your thoughts. I have a million. That's it. In a way, it's fair, but I guess the challenge with that is that Nazism predates Nazism and also postdates it. That's a funny way of saying it, but if you're talking about that technocratic expertiseism, it's not exclusively German. And it certainly perpetuates. It's arguably the ruling elite ideology of the day at the moment. What do you think?
Could you restate that? Because I had a little trouble following. I'm sorry.
Sure. It is. I recently rewatched Can't Get You Out of My Head. One of the threads was the Germans lost, but the Nazis won, remaining in the bureaucracy and systems of modern society. I wondered your thoughts.
Okay, so let's go back to Carl Schmitt. I think Carl Schmitt is brilliant here. Again, it's really, you don't need to read Carl Schmitt. You can read Giorgio Agamben instead.
Yeah, true.
He's done a lot better with Schmitt's work anyway. The Schmitt's point, which the Nazis took to very quickly, was the idea of the state of exception. That, that being able to accept things, to suspend the rule of law and say, no, this is the law, but then here's the exception, and we are the only ones who can institute it. The Nazis took to that very quickly, but Schmitt's point was that, no, this is how every state works. Sorry, there's a tractor going by really fast.
There you go.
Okay. So that idea very quickly became a foundational political justification or theological justification, because this is the theology as well. Only God can decide the exception, and then sovereign is he who can decide the exception. It's the same. All of the, it would not be that the Nazis won, but that an idea that came out of the Nazi regime became the primary operating principle of every other government in the world, where they realized, okay, we now have the authority, or we, by being a state, by being authority, we have the right to suspend the rule of law at any point while still maintaining the rule of law. which is just, again, that's what kings could do, but the king was at least, kind of counterbalanced by the Pope often, or by the priests. But here, no, the war on terror, the states of emergency in Europe after every even minor terrorist attack, terrorism itself, like this is all defined by this process of state of exception. We can change the rules according to this without actually changing the order. And, that was birthed from the Nazi regime, and everyone else picked it up very quickly.
I like that. I was thinking the biopolitics and technocracy, which predates and formed the Nazis and subsequently postdated it. Like eugenics was a transatlantic project. A whole bunch of Nazi scientists ended up in the US, Operation Paperclip, and also the stay behind intelligence networks were literally old Nazi spy networks after the war. So there is like a bureaucratic retention, but I think that idea, the very specific way biopolitics is formulated in Nazism we're experiencing now, right? Like the biopolitics of the last 15 months. But it kind of comes back to, and why I said it predates Nazism and became a thing in Nazism, is I just don't, coming back to how we do things when doing this fraud, except when there are actual Nazis, which kind of like fascists, there aren't as many of them as you think. This is the other N word you shouldn't say. Like, what's the end game here? What's like finding Nazis under the bed in 2021? I fail to see the discursive value in it. It doesn't mean that it's not true or any of that stuff, but are we approaching the ideological challenges? Are we moving into different relation to the ideologies of today most effectively by calling everything Nazi? And I don't know if we are.
It's that Nazi has switched from a historical reality to, no one talks about the devil anymore.
Yeah.
But they talk about the fascist or the Nazi or whatever. It's the same mental space, divorced from that historical reality of, yes, this actually did occur. But now, I think this is incredibly important for most of the post-left got accused of being eco-Nazis or eco-fascists.
Yeah.
And the continuation of this idea of fascism and of Nazism was highly effective at shutting them up. And it continues, again, I get called a crypto-fascist all the time. And it's like, dude, I can't shut up about anything. I tell people about my sexual adventures. Do you think if I were a fascist, I would be silent about it? No, fuck you. But it's such this oh, well, I think he's satanic. I think, he's an infidel. He's a blasphemer. He's the devil is there. We define so much of ourselves in modern society, as the good against an unseen other that we kind of collectively agree, oh, well, the other is like this, but we can never actually point to the other, but just say we see signs, we see part of this Neoplatonic ideal of the other, of the evil inhabiting this person, and therefore we need to do something about them. And the only way around it is just to reject the idea that there is some sort of ideal good or bad, what is good, what is bad is always going to be personal. And there's no God out there saying, well, no, I made good because I am God. Good, God are the same word. Therefore you need to strive to be like me. No, there's nothing that is not how it works. It's not how the pagan gods work. When you have 1,000 gods, you have 1,000 goods. And those goods are oftentimes, as Cadmus, who wrote True to the Earth, he points out, when you have that many gods, and all of them are good, those goods are oftentimes exactly diametrically opposed from each other. So there's no one good, there's all of these goods. And in that sort of cosmos, and that sort of, religious political framework, you then have to compare goods, and you can't say, well, this is more good than the other. And this is like, okay, these are the goods, these are the goods. This is the action I choose here. But you can't universalized statements about it. Anytime there's a universalized statement, it's a monotheist statement.
Yes. And I agree, because actually that will be a version of that is kind of like my response to the next question, moving away from social media and back to bodies. Can the fact that the non-engaging no, it isn't work for things like the COVID vaccine, which is becoming increasingly difficult to not engage with? Well, that's kind of knowing what level of reality you're working on. So level of the field or level of bodies for a start, but also that's individualized, right? So that's coming back to Le Guin about where and how you intervene. And we're in this point where trying to make universal statements about body sovereignty and health is fraught. So it will be different for each person depending on how you are going to respond to the state insistence on, and whether you agree with it or not, the state insistence of injections. You can't necessarily know it isn't it, but you can use that same language of not universalizing statements and where you and it come into relation. You can move. If you're in the US, I know that's a glib statement, but like you can. There are places you can go half the US where that's not going to be an issue as one piece of it, but it's more the thinking, right? It's more the don't look for universals about body sovereignty, because that's not right. That's the state diktat monotheism you were talking about.
Yeah. So one thing I think that would help to remember is a lot of times. So for something like the vaccine or any sort of like body sovereignty question, or even any sort of ideological position where, let's say like, no, I've decided it's like this. This is how I feel it is. You don't need to tell the world.
No, so true. Yeah.
What happens is, for someone who says, no, I don't want this vaccine. For example, my partner cannot do it because he's had shingles for the last few months, and the vaccine will re-trigger the shingles. Like in every single case that people have had it recently, they're like, yeah, you can't take it. He doesn't need to make a politics out of it. All he has to do is like, well, okay, so I'm not going to do this because this will make me even sicker right now. I have another friend who, she's generally like cool with the vaccine, but there's none of the vaccines that she can have because of an allergy. But she does not need, the only reason why she would engage in hey, I'm not taking the vaccine because of this, is in order to find some sort of external validation of their personal choice.
Yeah.
And we need to get out of the point where we look for any sort of external validation. If it is truly your choice, you don't need an external validation. This applies for every bit of identity politics. If you choose to be trans, or if you are trans, great. You do not need the world to validate your decision if you are okay with that decision. You need the people around you to like kind of understand it or whatever. Or if you say I'm non-binary, or even if you say I'm a cloud, the only way that you can convince yourself that you are a cloud is because everyone else tells you you're a cloud. If that's the situation you're in, then maybe it is not really that kind of choice. But if you're making a personal choice about yourself, saying, no, this is what I choose to do, this is what I choose not to do. If you need external validation, then it's not fully your choice.
Agreed.
Instead, okay, I am thinking through this. I'm going to take the vaccine. I'm going to not take the vaccine, and I don't need to talk about it, because this is my one time in this body or whatever, however we want to.
Yeah, it's really wise because it is designed to do, as far as I can tell, among other things, increasing polarization. So a personal medical, and I get that there's immense pressure and that's up for critique. I am not I think it is absurd and dangerous and confusing why an experimental gene therapy that is literally still in human trials is trying to be forced into a mandatory situation. I can critique that politically and do. As for how you personally come into relation with your body and its health, it's such a good point. Don't let it be, my God, don't let your opinion on a vaccine or injection be an identity. What a terrible identity to like fall into tribes around, right?
Can I expand that 1 second? Because there's something you mentioned, I think in that I prefer not to, or I choose not to, or no. Resisting identity is a really, really important act as well. When someone says, this is you, you say, oh, whatever, or no. You don't have to identify yourself to that. But in any sort of thing, whether it is like an oppressed identity or whether it is a majoritarian identity or whatever, anytime someone tries to say, you are this, they're claiming power over you.
Yeah.
Are defining who you are. And this is something I get from Le Guin as well. So, resisting the identity and saying, no, I get to choose how I am, and I identify myself according to this, and maybe it changes tomorrow, or changes multiple times in my life. But when someone external says, you are this, worker, fascist, fag, whatever it is, you say no. I am me, and that's it. Resisting that, I think, is also a key to getting out of this constant reactivity where you're fighting, wasting time, wasting energy, falling apart just to struggle against something that's going to change next week. There's going to be a new thing that people are going to make you, want to struggle about. It's just resist it. Just no.
Just be, no. It's it comes down to that sort of fracturing rather than holistic view too. The cure for disease is health, and this kind of comes back to body sovereignty and all the rest of it. It's what this is a malformed version of a true discussion, and find what the true discussion is, and it's a discussion about your health, right? So that's the level that I approach things like this current injection drive from. It's like, well, this is a discussion about health, which is mine. So what does that look like for me? This isn't a discussion about injection. I mean, on the political level it is, and that's separate because we've made, hopefully, politics a bit small. Yeah. Nice one. Well, that's been 2 hours almost on the dot, sir. So we'll do a couple of things. Based on the contents of this discussion, obviously we'll find out where people can learn more about yourself and where you're writing and what you got going on and coming up. And before we get to that, are there any books or articles, classics, like I saw in the chat, people were talking about The Dispossessed, anything you think, oh, you should read this if you vibed on this kind of conversation, or watch this, or anything you want to leave people with in terms of homework?
Yeah, I would suggest Silvia Federici's work. A lot of kind of the for example, the question of the Nazification of, the way that that management ethic kind of like spread through. But, also her focus on the body, she got in a lot of trouble. She almost got canceled or whatever.
Hey, it's like COVID. You have it happens once and you're immune.
Right. Yeah. But I would look at her work because, one, she's a Marxist feminist. So one, right there in America, that's like, wait, what? No, you're feminist or Marxist. Marxists hate women, whatever. But then also, so she's done a lot of work with Zapatistas. She's done a lot of work in South America, and her Marxism would be specifically the kind of Marxism I'm speaking of, the autonomous Marxism, where you don't have to give up your metaphysics for this. Instead, you focus it on the bodies of the people, that you're speaking to, and like, how do you resist? How do you get a revolutionary society for these bodies? People, not just people with bodies, but people as bodies. So her work, I would highly suggest. And then her friend Peter Linebaugh was kind of my gateway drug to studying, you know, the Rebeccas, the White Boys, the stuff that I talked about at the beginning. You know, any of his books are great. I think it's the Many-Headed Hydra or something like that, where he talks heavily about the intermixing, the, you know, interfucking, as it were, of all of these racial identities that were not racial identities yet, and why that eventually, you know, came about, why the administrators had to say, oh, no, you're white, you belong here, you're black, you belong here, whatever. And what could have been. I mean, Peter Linebaugh is probably, you know, he is the best pre-leftist writer, as it were, you know. So I would recommend either of them, both of them, actually.
I didn't know that, but it makes sense to me about the fucking. You probably wouldn't. I'm not sure why you would know this. The first night the first fleet arrived in Australia, so that's the convict fleet that showed up to invade this place. There was a tremendous storm, and they put the tents up. And so there's this big tropical storm in Sydney, and they were all fucking. It was the first night was basically an orgy, all the women and men and whatever. And that led to the British police having to kind of reorganize how they do convicts into like women are over here and men are over here and so on, because this couldn't happen. It was one of the kind of turning points in Australia's carceral identity, was this kind of storm orgy on the first night. So there you go. State's gonna state. I would add to that, I'm going to put, if you're watching this on the replay, I'll have the Saul Newman post-anarchist piece that I mentioned below, and just on the kind of like Holy Roman Empire, decentral 1,000 years. There's a good book that's kind of half anarchist, half libertarian classic called Human Scale. That would be one that I would recommend from that angle. But then otherwise I keep thinking like, just read your Charles Eisenstein and watch Cloud Atlas. There you go. Ursula, Charles, Cloud Atlas.
Fucking brilliant movie.
Absolutely. And yourself, sir, where can people go, and like, what do you got going on? What's coming up?
Oh, I barely know. I'm teaching a couple of courses. One of them is already full up. The best way to find anything that I do is read.substack.com. It's all of my other writing gets filtered through there now. I write in multiple places. I can barely keep track, but that's where I would suggest, if you want to follow my stuff, you can subscribe for free so you get the emails in your inbox whenever I write something. So.
Awesome. Love it. And good chat, guys in the chat. Thank you for engaging with each other. Whenever I do these, because I keep it there, watching with one eye as it goes up, I have FOMO of not being in the chat, because however much I'm enjoying this, I'm like, that was a good point, Kelsey, or whatever. So thanks very much. I really, really enjoyed this. I found that really medicinal to kind of, hash through some things, and yeah, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, great fun. This was great.
Absolutely. All right. And thanks, guys, in the chat.
Yeah, you be well.
You too.